Let's begin with a story together. It's a movie from a few years ago, and it was taken from a book. The movie's called The Blind Side. You guys see The Blind Side when it came out? It was first a book by author Michael Lewis, and then later turned into a movie. And it's about a football player, Michael Orr. And really, it was a kind of rough start in life. He was one of 13 children and was in and out of foster care from the age of 7 as his mom battled alcohol and crack addiction. Academically challenged, there was one stretch where he went to 11 schools in 9 years, 11 separate schools. During much of high school, functionally homeless as he would bounce from a house of one relative to another and just crash on somebody's couch. But if you saw the movie, you know the storyline. He starts attending Briarcrest Christian School in Memphis, Tennessee. And Sean and Leanne Toohey bring Michael into their home, and they end up adopting Michael Orr. Now, Sean Toohey owned in Memphis a number of KFCs and Taco Bells. And one of the perks of being part of that family is that you could walk into any of those restaurants any day and get anything you wanted for free. And now Michael Orr, who at one point had to scrounge and scavenge for food and clothing, could now walk into a Taco Bell and order anything that he wanted. Now in Lewis's book, Michael Lewis' book, The Blind Side, he talks about Michael Orr consistently going into a Taco Bell and purchasing far more than he could possibly eat. And so he'd end up bringing food home, the refrigerator door would open, and he would be sliding in some Mexican pizza, which inevitably would just kind of congeal over the night into something less than appetizing. And his new dad, Sean Toohey, would look over at him just like, dude, what? And Michael would look at Sean and go, I forgot that I'm part of a new family. I forgot that I'm part of a new home. I forgot that there's going to be plenty of food. I forgot that I now have someone to call mom and dad. I forgot, because after living with a shortage mentality for so many years, it was just hard to get his brain around the fact that there was going to be plenty of food, more than enough. And my friends, sometimes we forget. We forget who we are at our very core. It's an artist's rendition of the city of Ephesus in the first century. It was the fourth largest city in the Roman Empire, an epicenter for trade on the Aegean Sea, tons of merchandise coming and going through Ephesus. And so it's important for me to look at a picture like this from time to time, just to remember when Paul is writing his epistle to the Ephesians, believers in and around the city of Ephesus, this is a major cosmopolitan, metropolitan area, the kind of place where you could walk down the street and probably hear 5 or 6 different languages being spoken because of the people that were coming, going from different parts of the world. And so the Apostle Paul spends more time in Ephesus than any other city on his missionary travels. Almost 3 years of his life developing a Jesus community in this city. And then later he writes the letter to the Ephesians in order to even more fully ground them in their faith. Now, the letter to the Ephesians is kind of interesting because it easily breaks down in what you find in chapters 1, 2, 3, and then what you find in chapters 4, 5, and 6. In chapters 1, 2, and 3, there's like no commands. I mean, there might be just one, like give thanks to God or something like that. But all the Apostle Paul does in chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Ephesians is just say, remember who you are, remember who you are, remember who you are. Then you turn the page and you're in 4, 5, and 6, and you get a commandment barrage. Let him who has been stealing steal no more. Therefore, put away falsehood. Speak truthfully to your neighbor. Let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but only that which is helpful for building others up. It says over, wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Kids, obey your parents. Parents, slaves, masters. All of this stuff is in chapters 4, 5, and 6. The beauty of the letter is that before he tells them what to do, he reminds them of who they are. You ready? Before he tells them how to behave, he reminds them that they belong. In chapters 1, 2, and 3, all he does is puts them in touch with the love of God, the grace of God, the mercy of God, the kindness of God that reached down to them. Because religion is attempting to find God, and the gospel, this is the God who came down to find you. And so, very first words, basically, in this letter to the Ephesians. There's a grace and peace to you part, right? But right after that, we find in love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. He wants to remind them that they are God's treasured daughters and they are God's cherished sons. That, my friends, is verse 4. The letter is just beginning. He says, I just want to remind you that he, the God of the universe, adopted you. In love, he marked you out for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. Why? Because he wanted to. And it's all the more powerful when we remember that the Roman culture in the days of the first century, there was something that was very, very common. It was called infant exposure. Kids were disposable in the first century. It's very common when a baby is born, you put the baby at the father's feet. If the father wants to claim the child as his own, he reaches out and picks it up. If not, he turns his back and walks away. Maybe this is a boy and he wanted a girl. Maybe this is a daughter and he wanted a son. Maybe there's some birthmark that he thinks is attached to ill fortune in his future. Any reason he wants to, he can turn his back and walk away. They wouldn't kill the infant. What they would do is expose the infant to the elements, infant exposure. Set the child in the city garbage dump, in the marketplace, out in a field somewhere. Let the gods decide whether the child lives or dies. Now, speculators would come along and pick over the infants, not out of charity, but in order to raise them and sell later as prostitutes or slaves. There were believers in Ephesus who had been dumped as infants and were now slaves on somebody's estate. And the first thing Paul mentions as he writes this dear letter is he says, do you understand, can you comprehend that the God of the universe picked you out, he picked you up, and he brought you home? He adopted you to be his treasured son. He adopted you to be his beloved daughter, and this becomes the most true thing about you. We just have, Michael Orr looks over at Sean, and Sean, his dad, goes, like, what? And Michael goes, I forgot who I am. I forgot the security. I forgot the family that I'm now in. I forgot the provision that I now receive. And we forget. I think what Paul wanted the Ephesians to know was that their most defining moment in life wasn't the person that dumped them, but the one who brought them home. We should be more defined by the fact that God adopted us. We should be more defined by that than by the fiancé that broke off the engagement. You should be more defined by that than the parent who bailed when you were young. More defined by that than the company that you think unfairly fired you, or the spouse that walked out on you. However difficult, challenging, and tragic those events are, We should be more defined by the God who brought us home than the person who threw us out. The God of the universe picked you out. He picked you up. He brought you home. This is what is meant, in part, by the words identity in Christ. That should form my identity more than anything else. What this means is that I shouldn't get my identity from my title. I bring that identity to my title. I don't get an identity from my house. I bring this identity to my house. I don't get my identity from my work. I bring that identity to my work. It never has just been more important than me maybe for right now, because for the last 39 years, I have been the senior pastor of Ada Bible Church. And last weekend, I stood on our platform and we made an announcement that about a year from now, I'm going to pass on the senior pastor baton to Pastor Aaron Buer, who served us faithfully for the last 15 years. And I'll continue to be a teacher, and I'll continue to pour in our community, but I will no longer be senior pastor. I will no longer be the decision maker. I will no longer be the decider. I may be an advisor. I'm not going to be in charge anymore. Some years ago, Chris and I were on vacation far from Grand Rapids, where we can just relax, where nobody knew us, and the wonderful young cashier, college age, looked up from the cashier and looked up, and then she did a double take, and she went, You're Ada Bible Church. It feels like that. But who am I when I'm not Ada Bible Church? When I'm no longer senior pastor. This past summer, I was speaking at a conference. And there was a guy, very similar situation to mine. He had built a ministry, grown a ministry on the other side of the state, and he had just passed off the baton. And I said, hey, dude, you got any advice? Because we're looking at like this happening in a while. And he says, yeah, I do have a word of advice. You better get very clear on your identity in Christ. What was he saying? Remember who you are, remember who you are, remember who you are, with title and position, without title and position. And he just leaned in and said, your most defining identity as a son deeply loved by the Father. On our best days, we remember who we are. That is what is most true about me. That, if you've come to know the Christ, is what is most true about you. Let me ask our worship team to come out now, and we're just going to have a song of response before I invite up Kevin to speak. I journal, not every day, but several days a week, and there's several things I do in expressing gratitude and other disciplines. Mark down the Bible that I read that day. But there's something that I have done for years. It's just at the very end of my journal entrance for the day, I just write down the statement, this is Jeff, your beloved son. This is Jeff, the son that you love. Or on my really challenging day, this is Jeffrey Wayne Manion, beloved child of the Father. I don't do that to remind God. I do that to remind me. And today I mention this to remind us.